Welcome to the Dreamit Dose. As a VC firm, we've been part of hundreds of funding events and due diligence processes. We've seen startups run into landmines and face headwinds that were largely avoidable. For startups, due diligence comes with each investment round, during M&A activity, and when going public. Fair warning, this is a long dose, but it's chock full of helpful information to ensure your due diligence goes smoothly. Let's dive in. Dreamit Ventures has been investing in great early-stage startups for over a decade. The Dreamit Dose allows us to share best practices to help even more founders. Tell us about your great startup using the links below. Before we get into the landmines, I want to start with 3 ground rules you should keep in mind during diligence. The first ground rule, your deal isn't done until the check clears the bank, meaning keep driving and managing your fundraising process or transaction until the wire transfer hits your account. We've seen founders celebrate early and take their foot off the gas, and then their deal doesn't close. Be careful here. The second ground rule, disclose early and often. One of the top things that can kill a deal is expectation misalignment. If you have issues that you think investors will be concerned about, those infamous skeletons in the closet, be forthcoming about them as early as possible. This ground rule starts when you're pitching. Don't bullshit investors in your pitch. Be honest, be transparent. Otherwise, it can catch up with you at the worst possible moment during diligence. Okay, our third and final ground rule, keep skeletons out of the closet. Skeletons end up becoming landmines, which create significant hurdles in the due diligence process. I'm about to tell you how to avoid some of the biggest landmines we see during due diligence. Keep them in mind as you're building your company and avoid making these mistakes. The first major one is around HR issues. This isn't just HR issues in general. It's a few specific HR issues that seem to cause startups the most problems. The first big one occurs if you have let go of employees or possibly a co-founder. For anyone departing your company, make sure you have a general release signed by both parties. Your attorney can give you a pretty standard document. If you do have to let people go, make sure you don't have scars on your cap table. What's an example of a scar? Someone who is no longer with your company but walked out with a material amount of equity. Make sure you structure your equity and vesting agreements correctly from the very beginning so this does not happen to you. Again, your corporate attorney can address this fairly easily. The next big avoidable HR issue is employment agreements. Investors want to make sure that everyone, employees and contractors alike, have the correct contracts and that the work performed by all parties is owned by the company they're investing in. So as you grow your team with full-time, part-time, and outside contractors, make sure all of your agreements are in place and buttoned up. Again, pretty boilerplate stuff that we see many startups fail to have in place. A final HR-related issue, the description of your team. We see many team slides that make it look like everyone is full-time. But when investors dig in during diligence, particularly in early-stage companies, they learn one or more key team members are part-time and/or contractors. How? They look up team members on LinkedIn and see that some don't list your company on their profile. They're working more than one job full-time, or their title on LinkedIn varies significantly from the way you described. So make sure the specifics of your team on social are correct. Moving on. Landmine number 2. Let's go deeper into your cap table. You should know that investors will carefully go through your cap table to make sure that ownership structure makes sense. Here are some of the significant issues they're looking for. First, did any of those aforementioned departed employees or co-founders take a part of your cap table with them? If so, how much? Second, did you do deals where you gave equity as part of the deal? Maybe you have some key early customers paying for or piloting your product, but are also getting warrants or equity in your company. If so, this is a big item you need to disclose to investors. However, this will bring into question the pricing you can command if a customer who paid for your solution is also getting equity in your company. The last cap table issue centers around stock options. Does your stock option pool look correct? Do investors think you've issued options commensurate with the roles? And does vesting make sense? Again, consult your attorney to make sure that your stock option pool and allocations are structured correctly. Your next landmine is around your revenue, budgets, and forecasts, and this can be a big one. Let's start with revenue. You must be accurate when discussing your past, present, and future revenue from your first pitch to during due diligence because investors will look at your numbers forward and backward, literally. When you pitch, you'll talk about your traction and what the future holds. So be very careful not to oversell and make sure you're characterizing your revenue correctly. If you're unsure how to characterize your revenue and you're a SaaS company, check out our Dreamit Dose on this topic, particularly if you use terms like annual recurring revenue, ARR, monthly recurring revenue, MRR, and total contract value, or TCV. Beyond revenue, make sure to apply serious rigor to all of your budgets and financial forecasts. You should feel very confident about the assumptions you've made in your models. To that end, make sure all of your models are built bottoms up. And don't be surprised when an investor wants to go deep into one of your models to stress test it and your assumptions. Often they want to see what happens when they change key variables at the core of your model. By the way, most often they're going to focus on your revenue ramp. The next landmine to watch out for: how you talk to investors about early customers and users. You should know that investors will most likely want to speak to them as part of customer reference checking. So expect any customer or logo you mention to be fair game for an investor to speak to. Note that when investors speak to customers and users, they'll dig into questions and issues like, is the product solving a really big and urgent need? What were you using before and why did you switch? How has your experience been working with the product, company, and team? Are you getting the full value you expected? What shortcomings do you see? Do you expect you'll expand your use? On that last point, the more you talk up a land and expand strategy, the more investors will want to explore it with customers to see if they honestly expect the expansion to occur. Like other diligence landmines, you can avoid them by accurately setting investor expectations. If people are just using an early product prototype or MVP held together with baling wire and tape, disclose that early. Look, the top things most investors are going to look for are traction and strong market interest in your product. If your product is a work in process and you have a lot of product or technical debt, that's fine. Just disclose it. Don't try to oversell the state of your product and characterize it like it's solid and bulletproof if it's not. Again, this is all about managing expectations. Okay, landmine number 5, the technology and your product. If you're working in a highly technical area, for instance, cybersecurity, medical devices, or maybe something that needs government approval, like an FDA 510K or an EU CE mark, expect investors will dig in hard and often bring in outside expertise to help them. If you're a software company, will investors do a code walkthrough? Probably not. But they may want to understand what open source software you're leveraging and if there are key pieces of software you need to license. They may ask an outside software architect or CTO to do a tech review to get a solid feel for how things are put together and some of your key algorithms. Okay, the next major landmine in due diligence I want to talk about is around your intellectual property or IP. Investors want to make sure you own your IP and they understand the exact status. So here are some big ticket IP items they'll look at that you should pay attention to early. Back to your employment and contractor agreements for a moment. Make sure these agreements assign any and all IP back to your company. Are you using IP from a university? Make sure your licensing agreements are tight and clean. Investors are going to look for exclusive license to the IP and that it's on a worldwide basis. Not in the IP realm, but while we're talking about university licensing, expect that investors will also dig in looking for unreasonably high university royalty agreements and if and how much equity the university may have in your company. Okay, the other big bucket of IP issues we see centers around patents. If during your pitch you talk about patents, make sure you're using the correct terminology so you are accurately setting expectations. Patented means a patent has been issued. Patent pending means a full patent or provisional patent has been filed, but a patent has not been issued. And on patent pending, are you talking about a provisional patent filing or a full patent filing? We see many startups lead investors astray, liberally throwing around a description of their patent status. Words matter. When it comes to describing the patent status of your IP, make sure you're using the correct terms and using them accurately from the very beginning so expectations are set for diligence. The last landmine is about company documentation. This is a meat and potatoes issue for most founders, but please make sure all of your company formation docs, authorizations, grants, issuances, past board meeting minutes, etc. are organized and easily accessible. Investors will need to look at all of this. The last thing you need to do is be desperately searching through your email, cloud storage, and notebook computers for these items. Make sure you have all of it correctly filed so it's easy for you to find. Oh, and that notebook computer where that critical file was only stored locally, you know the one. The one that the co-founder had who left the company is pissed and took the computer with them? Yeah, now you're screwed. Don't let that happen to you. Okay, we've made it through 7 big landmines. But while we're talking about due diligence, there's 2 more items I want to touch upon. First, the data room you should set up for diligence, a central location where investors can access and review all material information they need. We know many startups that always have their data room ready. Why? They use it as a document repository. Anytime they have a document that would likely be needed for diligence, they store it or link to it in their data room. And this is how you avoid losing an important document that's only stored locally. When putting together your data room, make sure you structure it into folders that align with a typical investor due diligence checklist. For example, HR, financials, forecast, contracts, IP. We'll put a link in the description below of a suggested due diligence checklist. Next, pick the data room tech solution that best suits your stage. Maybe you're just beginning and you want to use Dropbox or Google Drive, or you're at a later stage and you want to use something more powerful like Box. Pick a solution where you can share access with investors. There'll be way too many documents to email as attachments, and you want and need to stay organized. The last thing I want to mention is that diligence is a two-way street. This should not just be about investors diligencing you, but you should also diligence them. This is someone you're about to get married to for a long time. Ask investors for a few startups to speak with, and when you make the ask for 1 or 2 where there was not a good outcome. Why? You want to understand how the investor acted and helped when things were not going well. It's related to the saying, everyone looks like a genius in an up market. Investors earn their stripes and really show who they are when the chips are down. So talk to a founder or 2 who went through a difficult situation and see how the investor behaved. You want an investor who will be there through thick and thin. In this case, past performance can be a very good indicator of future action or inaction. Okay, that's it. That's how you can avoid major landmines that can come up during due diligence. First, make sure to watch out for HR issues around when people are joining your company as well as departing. Second, make sure to keep your cap table clean around ownership and stock options. Third, when talking about revenue, budgets, and forecasts, be careful about your assumptions, build bottoms up, and make sure to characterize your revenue accurately. Fourth, know that investors want to talk to key customers, so when pitching, realize anyone you mention is fair game. Fifth, your tech. Be careful how you describe your product and its current state. Sixth, make sure you're accurate in how you describe your IP around patents and licensing. Seventh, data rooms. Have one. Keep it organized using folders and descriptive file names. And eighth, diligence is a two-way street. Remember to diligence investors with founders who had both good and not so good outcomes. That's it. That's your Dreamit Dose. Please leave your questions in the comments section. If you found this video valuable, please like and subscribe. We have a lot more coming. To see all of our doses, go to dreamit.com/dose. See you next time. As a VC firm, we've been part of hundreds of funding events and due diligence. I'm about to tell you about how to avoid, it's just too messy. Often they want to see what happens when they change key variables that, let me just see how I want to word that.